This is Mrs. Wainwright's math class, Chapter 11, Lesson 3, Quadrilaterals. Today's learning target: by the end of this lesson, you should confidently be able to say, I can classify and compare quadrilaterals. We will learn how to classify quadrilaterals from the Classifying Quadrilaterals videos produced by both Real Math Solutions and by Math Lambert. Pay attention, there will be questions at the end of the lesson.
Quadrilaterals, we know, are polygons that are made up of four edges. However, we also know we tend to use words such as squares, rectangles, or even trapezoids to describe a lot of these figures. That's what we need to look at. What takes a shape from simply being a quadrilateral to one of these more specific types?
So a quadrilateral is a four-sided figure with four angles. There are many kinds of quadrilaterals, but the five most common types are parallelogram, rectangle, rhombus, square, and trapezoid.
We're going to start by looking at trapezoids. In order for a figure to be a trapezoid, first off, it must be a quadrilateral and have four edges. From there, we need to look for one set of parallel edges. That means there are two edges on the figure that are never going to cross, touch, or intersect with one another. The type of trapezoid that most of us tend to be familiar with is an isosceles trapezoid. On an isosceles trapezoid, we still have our one set of parallel edges, but we also need to look for the isosceles portion, which means there are two edges that are congruent. So in order to be an isosceles trapezoid, we need one set of parallel edges and one set of congruent edges.
The trapezoid has only one pair of parallel sides. So you can have special trapezoids where the unparalleled sides happen to be congruent. So that would be called an isosceles trapezoid. But the only requirement to be a trapezoid is that one pair of parallel sides. So this shape is a trapezoid because it has one set of parallel sides and four sides altogether. Even though it has those two right angles, it still falls under that trapezoid category.
In order for a figure to be a parallelogram, first off, it needs to be a quadrilateral and have four edges. From there, we need to look for two sets of parallel edges, meaning the top and bottom edge are never going to cross, touch, or intersect, and the left and right edge are never going to cross, touch, or intersect. In addition to being parallel, opposite edges also have to be congruent. That means the left and right edges are going to be the same length, and the top and bottom edges are going to be the same length. From there, we can look at the angles on a parallelogram. On a parallelogram, opposite angles are going to be congruent, meaning these two angles are going to have the same measure, and these two angles are going to have the same measure.
So a parallelogram has opposite sides that are parallel, the opposite sides are equal,
And
opposite angles are equal,
these are the things that make it a parallelogram.
From a parallelogram, we can go to a more specific type called a rectangle. In order to be a rectangle, we have to have opposite sides be equal and parallel, but instead of opposite angles being congruent, we need all four angles to be congruent. More specifically, the angles on a rectangle have to be right angles worth 90 degrees each.
the rectangle where the opposite sides are parallel, the opposite sides are equal, and all angles are right angles. So since they're all right angles, that means that the opposite angles have to be equal. So that means that the rectangle has all the same properties of the parallelogram.
On a rhombus, we have opposite sides that are parallel, and we have opposite angles that are congruent. However, instead of just having opposite sides be congruent, we have all four edges that are congruent.
The rhombus also has opposite sides that are parallel, the opposite angles are equal, and then all the sides are equal. So since it has all those other features of the parallelogram, that means it's also a parallelogram. Because if all sides are equal, that means the opposite sides are equal.
From a rhombus, we can construct probably the most specific type of parallelogram, and that would be a square. In order for a figure to be a square, all four sides have to be congruent, opposite sides have to be congruent, and all four angles have to be worth 90 degrees. This means a square is related to a parallelogram, a rhombus, and a rectangle since it shares characteristics of each.
Square has, again, opposite sides are parallel, all angles are right angles, and all sides are equal. So that means that not only does it have all the same properties or features of a parallelogram, it also has all the same properties of the rectangle and the rhombus. So that means square can also be called a rhombus, a rectangle, or parallelogram.
Next time you see a quadrilateral, look at the characteristics of its edges and angles and see if you can find any patterns. If you do, use those patterns to give it its most specific name possible.
To figure out what is the sum of the interior angles on a quadrilateral, use the following to help answer this question. The sum of the interior angles of a triangle is 180 degrees. The angles in a rectangle and square each have a measure of 90 degrees. And all else fails, you can use your protractor. Using all of that, you should come up with the thought that the sum of the interior angles on a quadrilateral add up to 360 degrees.
And that's the same for every quadrilateral, no matter what type. For every single quadrilateral, the sum of the interior angles equals 360 degrees. Now let's review with Number Rock's Quadrilaterals song.
Parallelograms have two sets of parallel lines. Trapezoids only have one set at a time. A rectangle has four right angles. A rhombus has four sides that are equal. Squares have four equal sides and four right angles. Quadrilaterals have four sides and four angles. Parallelograms, rhombuses, trapezoids, squares and rectangles. And if you add the angles inside each of these, there will be 360 degrees. Parallelograms have two sets of parallel lines. Trapezoids only have one set at a time. A rectangle has four right angles. A rhombus has four sides that are equal. Squares have four equal sides and four right angles. Quadrilaterals have four sides and four angles. Parallelograms, rhombuses, trapezoids, squares and rectangles. And if you add the angles inside each of these, there will be 360 degrees.
Please stop the video and complete worksheet numbers 1 through 4 right now. You can go back and rewatch the videos if you need to. Hopefully by now you can confidently say, I can classify and compare quadrilaterals. We will be practicing more in class, but again, with all of our geometry lessons, this is really information that you need to memorize. Please see one of the teachers if you're having difficulty. We can find some time for you to make flashcards so that you can use them to study and memorize this information. Good luck with this lesson.